Hey everybody, welcome back. Dr. Rob Silverman here. I've got my good friend, national international speaker, CEO and founder of 8 Weeks to Wellness. My buddy's got 34 years of chiropractic experience. He has 80 different practices that he manages through his distributorship of 8 Weeks to Wellness. I'm excited to get a few minutes with him. My friend's name is Dr. Dane Donohue. Dr. Dane, how are you today?
Robert, I'm really excited for this podcast and this interview. You and I have been friends for a long time. We speak the same language, but I think at the end of the day, what we really want is to help people.
Without question, because we both use this term, health is wealth. So let's start out. In America, 75% of Americans are overweight or obese. Less than 7% of our patients are metabolically healthy. The cost of healthcare dollars are going up. Globally, 13% of the global population is now clinically obese. 39% are overweight. 50% of the global population will be obese in the next 10 years. Worldwide obesity has nearly tripled since 1975. Obesity is the number one reason for chronic inflammation in the brain and the body. And neurodegenerative disease is on the rise because of obesity. Dr. Dane, what's wrong? What do we need to do?
Well, I think, the telling thing, Robert, is the largest percentage of increase in obesity, both BMI over 30, is in children. And that should tell us a lot. I know since I've been in practice, I remember lecturing when obesity rates were, and I'm talking about BMI over 30, I'm not talking about being overweight, but obesity
Right.
rates were in the low 20%, high
Mm,
teens, right? Now we have close to 40% of the population is obese, not just overweight, but obese. And as I tell my patients, Robert, you're not going to see a lot of chronic disease. If your BMI is 27, and again, you and I talk a lot more about body composition than we do
correct.
BMI. Body mass index is just a calculation that anybody can do, right? It doesn't really tell us anything about the composition of that weight or the, functionality of the composition of that weight. So it's, a very small window, but it does tell us once that BMI gets over 30, most people aren't
Right.
Arnold Schwarzenegger and they're carrying too much muscle in their body, and I hear that, I'm sure you hear it a lot too as well. Can't your BMI be high because you have too much muscle on your body? But I always wonder
Yeah,
why people that are overweight are asking me that question. It's like, yes, you can. You can be Arnold Schwarzenegger, but you are not that person, you know? So,
exactly.
I think that that's the telling thing is obviously in the world that we live in, ultra processed, sedentary, lots of stress. It's just an epidemic. But at the same time, I'm very hopeful with what's going on politically. The people that we have in power are really starting to focus on the underlying cause of chronic disease rather than just the treatment of chronic
Right.
disease.
You make some good points. Many of my patients come in and they use Arnold as a example, and he's obviously not an example. He's an exception to the rule.
Right.
But we both suffer from the problems that our patients come in from, in that our patients are suffering from obesity. But when you really looked at those numbers, globally, we have a problem. But look who's leading the global push for obesity and overweightness and unhealth, if you will, United States of America. So, Dr. Dane, what are your three number one tips for dealing with this chronic inflammation and chronic obesity?
That's a really big question. We could be here for the rest of the podcast addressing that. But the one thing I'm blessed, Robert, because I grew up, a lot of people come to healthcare as a provider of healthcare, whether you're a medical doctor, a chiropractor, osteopath, functional medicine doctor, naturopath. We come because we had a personal experience that we went
Right.
through that then, we were helped in some fashion by some healing art. And for myself, I was really blessed. I didn't have that, Robert. I grew up in a chiropractic family. My dad was a chiropractor. My grandfather was
Right.
a chiropractor. My uncle, who was a mentor of mine, was a chiropractor. And I really got to see the difference between our family, the way our family lived, and the way that a typical American family lives. And it was dramatically different.
Mm.
We talked a different language and we also talked about health and wellness. It was really the foundation upon which our family was built. We talked about health and well-being. So I think, if we're going to talk about the top three drivers or the top three tips, I think it starts off with your core beliefs and your core philosophy
Right.
of how you care for yourself or how you teach your children to care for yourself. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to hand that belief system over to the environment to teach your children how to live. That's going to go very
Right.
badly, you know? So I think the first thing is we need to take personal responsibility. And I love that word responsibility. I learned from Stephen Covey, response able. We are able to choose our belief system. We are able to surround ourselves with like-minded individual. And if I could just tell a quick story, Robert,
You have
I
one.
remember one time I have two boys, one's 30 now and one's 27, and he's getting ready to graduate chiropractic college. Extremely proud because he'll be a fourth generation chiropractor in our family,
Wow.
which
Wow.
I think is pretty amazing in and of itself. But
Come
and
on,
again,
Dane. Wow.
yeah, it's amazing. And nobody ever pushed, like my dad never pushed me to go into chiropractic or natural health. I never pushed my son, but when you're in our family and you see the impact of what you do to help patients, it's really powerful. I know for me growing up, I didn't have a personal experience. I was never chronically ill as a child, right? So I didn't have this aha moment like I was helped with XYZ disease, and now I want to go help other people with that same problem by becoming a physician. For me, it was like, wow, my dad, my uncle, my grandfather really have impact on people's lives, and it's not because they're writing them a script. It's chiropractors who don't write prescriptions.
So let
It,
me
it,
ask you a question. Let me interject because I
yeah.
know the answer and people be interested. How many prescription medications have you taken in your life?
And again, I want to preface this by saying it's not that I don't believe in medication, and it's
Sure.
not that I wouldn't take a medication if I really believed that I needed to. Okay. But I can count on this hand the number of not only prescription, but the number of over-the-counter medications that I've taken my whole life. I'm talking Advil, Tylenol, aspirin, prescription medication. On this hand, I've taken prescription medication for a deviated septum that I had repaired. I've taken one or two antibiotics over the course of my life,
Sure.
probably no more than two, absolutely. So probably no more than five medications my whole life. I never take over-the-counter medications if I don't have to.
So that's like the antithesis of many Americans. We are 4.4% of the world's population. We use 80% of the world's drugs, 52% of the world's pain drugs. Incidentally, I'm going to give you a factoid that two adjustments in 90 days, which you and I would agree is not overutilization, decreases the need for prescription opiates by 55%. So it's fair to say that you grew up in a chiropractic atmosphere, a chiropractic environment, which is health oriented.
Yeah, I didn't see members of my family. And I didn't recognize this till later, Robert, but looking back, I never saw, our family taking, chronic prescription medications or going to the doctor with chronic allergies and asthma and ADHD and these types of things that I think were really related to the environment. So when you talk about what are the three drivers of chronic disease, I think ignorance is really one of them. We
Mm,
can't change things that we're not aware of. And I think so many people want that tip. Is it nutrition? Is it exercise? Is it strength? Peter Attia was just on 60 Minutes this past
great job.
weekend, and I thought he did a fantastic job. But for guys like you and I, we were like, boy, everybody should know this. So while that was an enlightening segment for probably 95% of the population, the 5% of us were like, yeah, this is first grade stuff. Like this, everybody should know this. So I think the first driver has to be education. We know, doctor obviously means teacher in Latin. But we have
Right.
to become more cognizant of building these philosophies into our conversations with our family and our friends.
I agree. And I do believe it's in education. And, I think some of the problems with the American population is people are resistant to change. And we've got on this slippery slope of bad health, eating, as you said before, ultra processed food. 57% of the American calories come from ultra processed food. I think it's over 60% for young adults. Obviously, that poses a deleterious end result. So education and to really revert into what Peter Attia said, I agree with you. I think he did a great job. What did he talk about? Food, exercise, supplements, sleep. It kind of sounds like this program called 8 Weeks to Wellness that we
Right.
referred to before. So why don't you tell us your origin story of 8 Weeks to Wellness?
Sure. So if I can just back up for just a minute, because we talked about the three drivers, and I do want to get to these three drivers, but maybe this will help the conversation as we lead into 8 weeks to wellness. But I remember vividly because when we talk about one of the drivers being philosophy, education, it really drives our beliefs, it drives our actions. I remember vividly my youngest son, who I mentioned was going to be a fourth generation chiropractor. He had a best friend, right? And growing up, the two were inseparable. So I really got to know his mom and dad. And I would say they were the typical standard American people. They had the standard American diet. They were very sedentary. They were both overweight, both taking medications for different chronic diseases. And I remember one day, the Rita, the mom, showing up in my office, and she just came in, Robert, and said, "My husband and I want to do 8 weeks to wellness." And I said, "That's great, Rita." I said, "But what prompted this decision?" And she said, "Well, you know what? I was dropping Alex off to your house the other day, and you were cutting the lawn. And I looked at you, and it was summertime, so I was cutting lawn in my shorts, no shirt on." She said, "You and I are the same age, right? Her husband's a little bit older than me, but I looked at my husband and I looked at you and said, this is very different. There's
Mm,
something that Dane and Jill are doing different than the way we're living our life and the way the consequences of what we're getting because of that. And I have to learn what that is." And it was the first time, Robert, I said to myself, being a role model for people is really important. People don't do what you say, they do what you do, right? And
right.
so I can say, I'm healthy, I take supplements, I'm this. But listen, when people look at you, they can tell from your skin, they can tell from your happiness, right? Your overall energy level. They can
Right.
tell energy is the ability to do work. They can tell whether you're a healthy individual or not. And people want to follow leaders in healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, the imagery of the doctor, and we're not making fun of them, was the coffee stain smoking a cigarette with a big belly. That wasn't my primary care physician. He just smoked in front of me. But I agree with you. We're role models. We're role models for healthcare practitioners. And we both had some great role models, both in and out of chiropractic, both in and out of healthcare, as a matter of fact. And it's one thing if we can, star something now that somebody young listening, you are a role model for who you represent. Don't forget that. A good friend of mine always tells me if my podcast doesn't grow, it doesn't matter. It's who those that you reach that are engaged by you that you motivate. That's that dash on your tombstone, if you will, like the poem says. So, not to get philosophical or anything of that nature, I do want to give you the baton and I want you to talk about your 8 weeks to wellness.
Sure.
Love the program.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, Robert, you've been a huge part in training our doctors, particularly on the functional medicine laboratory piece, introducing me to InBody years and years ago. So you've been a big part of 8 weeks to wellness, and I do thank you for that. But I would say, the driver for why my sister and I created the program, and we're now let's see, we're in our 24th year of the program. And like you said, it's being implemented in chiropractic offices around the country. But I wanted to teach people what I call the chiropractic lifestyle. And Robert, in chiropractic, we talk a lot about health being the body's ability to adapt to its environment. And the two key words I think there are adaptation and environment, right? You need to be able, your body has this innate sense to adapt and heal, but it has to be placed in the right environment, right? We can't be sedentary. We can't smoke. We can't have a toxic overload in our body and expect that our body's going to be able to overcome that environment, right? So we wanted, Denise and I, we saw people that were coming into our practice. And at that time, 2003, when we launched the program, I had been in practice long enough, about 12, 13 years at that time, to see what I call repeat offenders. They would come in with a knee pain and I would help them. And then they would come in with the same problem or a different problem related to, improper functional movement or improper symmetry and alignment in the body. And then you would have somebody else who was obese and they're type 2 diabetic and they're on statins and blood pressure medication. And it's completely related to their nutrition and their lack of exercise. And
Right.
I'm like, we have to, I said to Denise, we have to do more for these people. We've got to teach them the chiropractic lifestyle. And the chiropractic lifestyle is, okay, health the body's ability to adapt to its environment. What's the environment? The environment is a triune of physical health, mental, emotional health, and biochemical health.
Right.
I learned that growing up, Robert. Like that's not new, no, right? I've learned that. I'll be 57 next month, and we've been talking about that for 56 years, right? So we just built a program around that. So we wanted to teach people. I thought, accountability is really important, Robert. You can tell a patient what to do, but the likelihood that they're going to adopt new beliefs and new behaviors when they leave your office is really slim to none unless they're extremely motivated by a
Right.
heart attack or something like that. You will see people radically change their behavior, but it's usually times of immense crisis, right? It's like do this or die, right? But how do we get people to change their health behaviors before they have that radical life-changing event? And so Denise and I embarked for a year and a half to develop this program called 8 Weeks to Wellness, and we've been doing it now for almost 24 years.
So without question, it's proactive tools to learn to how not to be reactive, which is a paradigm shift from the typical medical model that we live in the US today, not taking shots at anything. That paradigm shift has really become the chiropractic ethos, if you will. So in 8 weeks to wellness, you have something called a wellness score. I love this because patients don't understand what things mean till you show them a picture, a video, a number. If you just say, hey, you're unhealthy, that just doesn't work. And hey, I filled the beginning of the podcast with numbers to set the stage. Those numbers don't mean anything unless they're intrinsic to you. So let's take it a piece at a time. Your wellness score is quite comprehensive. You have posture, x-ray, weight, lean body fat mass, blood pressure, specific inflammatory markers, blood sugar, cholesterol levels. Did I miss anything? And if I didn't, let's start with posture.
Okay. So, and this is really important. Denise and I, when we developed the program, we need biomarkers of health because I always say, Robert, physiology doesn't lie, but people do, right?
Mhm.
So your blood pressure is your blood pressure. It tells a story. Your C-reactive protein, your homocysteine, your ApoB, your LP little a, all the things that you talk about, muscle mass versus body fat. So
Right.
one of the important things, and I don't see this on a lot of reports, Robert, but we give people an assessment of what their ratio of muscle to fat is. So guys that are our age, right, in their mid to late 50s, right? I think you may actually be over 60. I'm not sure, but
I'm right at 60. Thank you.
right at 60.
It's
Well, I've
okay.
known you for a long time, and I always knew that you were a few years older than me. But guys our age, it's very good if we can have a 3-to-1 ratio of muscle to fat. So if we can have 3 pounds of muscle for every
Great.
pound of fat, we're doing a pretty darn good job, right? So we speak in terms of very common sense information. Some of these labs get very technical for patients,
Mhm.
but we're talking. And by the way, Peter Attia on his segment, what did he talk about? He
Muscle
talked about
mass.
this lab work, how different. He talked about ApoB. I believe he mentioned LP little a. He talked about VO2
Right.
max. He talked about all these biomarkers. So the lab biomarkers are definitely different than what somebody would get in a common metabolic panel
Correct.
at a doctor's office. So, for example, let's talk blood sugar, right? Most of the time they're going to get what? Fasting glucose. They're not going to, sometimes I would say 50% of the times when I get labs back from physicians, 50% of the time it'll have hemoglobin A1C. Or almost rarely does it ever have fasting insulin. Well, if I said to you, Robert, which of the three markers would you most likely to see to be able to help a patient with their dysglycemia, fasting glucose, fasting insulin, or hemoglobin A1C? What would you say?
For me, it's all about insulin,
Right. Me too. Right. But I
the
never see that
response.
on lab markers, right? When you get a lipid panel, do you ever see ApoB? Right. You
Not
rarely see
enough.
homocysteine. Rarely, like something simple, Robert. I always calculate a person's, and it's on our wellness score, their triglyceride to HDL ratio, which is
Mm.
17 times, not 17%, 17 times more
Mm.
likely to predict a cardiovascular event than looking at total cholesterol alone. Well, your patients don't know that. We do the calculation for people and we'll give them the study if they want it so that they know that this is the one of the most predictive markers. Why do we take statins? Why do we manage cholesterol? At the end of the day, we were trying to prevent cardiovascular events. Well, if we're really trying to do that, why aren't we telling people their triglyceride to HDL ratio?
I agree. It's interesting. I'm going to do a spoiler alert. Total cholesterol means pittance, to be perfectly frank. If the doctor says your total cholesterol is this and doesn't follow up with what we call particle size, and I think we may need to delineate some of these tests, ApoB, LP little a, the ratios in which you're talking about, which have been shown in medical journals to be much more revealing towards heart attack. You used the triglyceride one, which was a great one, 17 to 1, ApoB, which Atia talks about. Only 5% of the population has been tested for ApoB. LP little a, which is a genetic heart attack marker, only 1% of the population has been tested for.
And these are all tests that we include as part of our wellness score. And
Right.
again, Robert, something that you mentioned that a lot of functional medicines doctors don't really incorporate, but we look at functional movements. We do a functional movement screen. We give people a score on that. We look at forward head posture and symmetry of the spine. We do digital postural pictures to assess symmetry of the body. So we really do look at that physical, mental, emotional, biochemical aspect of physiology.
You know what? I think the wellness score is the perfect time for something I do on my podcast, which is called rapid fire. It's New York style rapid fire. So I'm going to hit you with each part. We'll try and keep it to a concise minute answer. And this way, everybody can write notes down as you give it. So, posture.
One of the greatest, and I have this literally carved into a stone, a very nice granite stone, was something I learned from you years and years ago speaking at one of our events. And this, I believe, was from Sheridan
Correct.
back in the early 1900s, said that posture follows movement like a shadow, right? And I don't know if
Right.
you want to expand on that, but I don't think that we can illustrate anything better. One of the things that I do, and I wish I had it here, Robert, but I have a letter opener. And it's a very simple analogy I give to patients. I take my letter opener, and my letter opener is very bendable, right? So I can bend it and it won't break, right? So I'll take the letter open, bend it in front of them, and I'll say, okay, Robert, distortion creates strain on the body. And what I mean by that, if I take this letter opener and bend it, can you point to me if I keep bending it where it's going to break? Well, they always point to where the distortion or the apex of the strain
Correct.
is. People, they understand that mentally. And then I'll turn it vertically and say, if you have distortion in your broad body, you're creating strain points that over time will have an injury, will have a herniated disc, will have a degenerated joint, like a degenerated hip. Why do people's left hip wear out before the right hip? Because they're distorting and creating more strain on that hip over time. So the thing I want you to know is posture is a reflection of symmetry, which is a reflection of alignment. And when you have asymmetry in your posture, you're going to have asymmetry in your movements because posture follows movement like a shadow. So today, we're not only going to assess your movement patterns, but we're also going to digitally assess your posture.
Movement never lies. It tells the story of all the injuries you've had, or any of your congenital issues, or any of your functional issues. As far as longevity is concerned, the number one test to determine longevity is movement and movement dysfunction or movement patterns. How many times have you gone to a doctor and they watched how you walked, sat, stand? Now, forget the overhead squat. We could really delineate that, but yeah, I
Nobody
saw
can.
you roll your eyes. Who does
Right.
it?
Yeah.
That's a rough one.
It was interesting, Robert. I had a 14-year-old new patient, wrestler, lacrosse player, real athlete last night, and having neck pain and also having lower back pain. Really healthy looking kid, nice kid. And when I did his postural picture and his overhead squat was horrible. He had almost 2 inches of forward head translation. And you and I both know for every inch of forward head translation, it almost doubles the weight of the head on the neck, the effective weight, right? And what was his posterior chain doing? His traps, his rhomboids, his rector spinae muscles, they were all loaded, super, super tight. And it was amazing. This kid was very into learning about his body. And as I explained these things, you could just tell the light bulb was going off. I was like, wow, this is why I'm hurting all the time.
It's interesting how the break in symmetry will put a strain on your system and you'll have to work harder. So when people come in, they're tired, we slouch more. So that's a great point. X-ray. Why would
Mhm.
you take an X-ray for someone? Chiropractors always take X-ray. They love to take X-ray.
Well, I do, and I have to say, as a chiropractor, a X-ray is like a blueprint for me. I can't tell you how many times, Robert, I've had somebody come in with lower back pain. They have a pars fracture. I've seen tumors on X-rays. I think just, there's contraindications to adjusting a person's spine, and I think as
Sure.
a doctor, we should know that. But for me, it's, beyond the contraindications, it is the blueprint. We use a digital software to analyze the spine for pelvic rotation, forward head
Right.
translation. I think people don't know, like how many times, Robert, you look at a cervical spine, you have phase 2 or 3 degeneration, and
Right.
people are like, "Well, my neck just started hurting 3 months ago. Like, what's going on here?" Right? They had a trauma that never resolved itself. They, are in a desk job where they sit for 40 hours a week, and they can't understand why they have this neck pain and this degenerative neck, and again, the same spots. So I think X-ray is extremely important to my diagnosis with patients, my education with patients, and also ruling out contraindications to adjustments.
So X-ray really shows the structure of the body. When you add it with movement of the body, now you're getting structure and function of the body. So you're getting a reveal from the inside out of the body. And I think that's a great way to analyze, and that should be on everybody's what I call vitals or physical exam.
And just to say this, Robert, just to illustrate the point we're making, I had a patient in yesterday, and on his lateral lumbar, he had plaquing in his abdominal aorta. You know, plaquing is calcium that's being deposited in the lumen of the blood vessel, and it shows up on an X-ray. Well, when I talked to him about it, he had no clue, right? And I'm like, listen, if I were you, I'd go get a calcium score or maybe follow up with your
Sure.
doctor or cardiologist. This is, you're at risk, you know? So, I better that people know there's a ticking time bomb rather than, know when it explodes.
Test and not guess. Speaking of testing, body fat composition. What I really like that you said before, and most people don't use it, the ratio of 3-to-1 muscle to fat. So, how are you able to test for this? How are you able to assess this? And then what does it mean?
Okay, great question, Robert. Obviously we use in-body. I mean, in a perfect world, if we were really assessing this, we'd use DEXA, which you and I
Right.
both know is the most sensitive, is what Peter Attia talks about and uses. We use something called an in-body, which is obviously bioimpedance analysis.
Right.
On the in-body, relative to gender and age, we get a lot of data, right? We get extracellular water, total body water. We get obviously BMI. We get body composition in terms of muscle mass in pounds, body fat mass in pounds, distribution of that muscle and fat into 5 different compartments. But it's a simple calculation. I literally go with patients, okay, based on your age, right? And we can break this down. A young person, this kid last night, 14-year-old kid, wrestler, he had
Mhm.
5-to-1 ratio of
Wow.
muscle. He had 74 pounds of muscle. He had about, I think, 14.5 pounds of body fat. So it's like a
Wow.
5 to 6 to 1 ratio of muscle to fat.
Amazing.
That's an athlete who's, he was 10% body fat. So, and then we have the other range of, 80-year-old women who come in, or sometimes 60-year-old women who are 240 pounds, and they have over 100 pounds of fat on their body, and they have maybe 50 pounds of muscle. So now they're not even 1-to-1 ratio. They're, zero point 0.5 ratio of muscle to fat. So it means that for every pound of fat, they have only a half a pound of muscle. And obviously, we all know that visceral fat is the worst place to carry fat because
Right.
it is morphologically different than subcutaneous fat. Visceral fat, it's pro-inflammatory, it produces cytokines, it works its way into our organs. And I don't know about you, Robert, but I, never saw fatty liver disease. Hardly ever was it mentioned when I first got into practice, maybe in alcoholics. But how many times now are we seeing elevated liver enzymes because of NASH, or because of just, general fatty accumulation in the liver in these organs? People don't know about this, and do they go to their doctor and say you have fatty liver disease? Well, they never thought the fat they were accumulating in their abdomen was actually making its way into their organs as well.
Well, the whole idea of adding the functional investigative component is to look past the tree, make the tree move, if you will, look into the roots and kind of determine what the problem is. It's not really root cause resolution anymore. It's root causes resolution. And your DEXA, now DEXA and in body, they're very close statistically for body composition. The advantage that the DEXA has is that it tells you about bone.
Mm.
But the InBody I use as well, and the InBody does break up the quadrants, breaks up the muscle to fat. And again, that visceral fat is a critical element because visceral fat, like you said, innervates organs. Interesting now that there's a study that came out about LP little a, and we were told, oh, you can't affect LP little a, that genetic heart attack marker. However, your waist to hip ratio, which is based on your visceral fat, if that decreases, even if you have LP little a, you're not having the heart attack.
We
Really
look at
want to
waist to
echo what
height
you said.
ratio as well, Robert. I don't know how you feel about that, but we've kind of transitioned from waist to hip more to waist to height as a marker that we use in our wellness score.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't the one that was studied in the test, but I agree with you. I think that we need to have multiple mediums, multiple different ways to really ascertain what's going on because of the root cause resolution. And one thing I want to piggyback on, and not that I want to get off the 8 weeks to wellness wellness score because I think the wellness score is a pristine way to test for people's what I like to do or like to call as a vital.
Wait, the
You.
wellness score gives them a grade, Robert, which I think is really powerful.
Mhm.
Like, when was the last time you got a grade in your physiology? So, like, at the end of the report and at the top of the report, it gives them an F, and these people look at these things and they're like, an F? I never got an F, right? I said, well, I'm not talking about your intelligence. I'm talking about your physiology. So, while you may have gotten all A's in school, you are failing when it comes to your overall health and well-being.
You know, it's funny that F will translate to bad grades in school because we all know that that kind of physiological damage doesn't allow the brain to be in a health promoting arena. So the one thing I wanted to ask, and I like to ask a lot of doctors with vast experience, and you just don't have experience within your 34 years. You've got lifetimes of experience. I'll ask you this. Are the patients 30 years ago healthier or sicker than the patients today?
Without a doubt, I think people 30 years ago are much healthier than the people that we see today.
Let me interject. If that's the
Sure.
case, Dr. Dane, don't we as healthcare practitioners need to use more tools to assess and more tools to fix those problems?
There's no doubt about it, Robert, but I also would say we need more strategies to help people overcome the toxic, environments that they live in. I think people need strategies. 8 weeks to wellness is a strategy. So, for example, Robert, we do the exercise in our clinic. They work out with trainers. We focus
Mhm.
on their cardiovascular endurance. We focus on their strength. We focus on their posture mobility. But they come to the office and work out. You know why? I have control over them when they're working out. We can work
Right.
around injuries, we can push them harder, we can really work on strength. They meet with a clinical nutritionist, in our office 5 times during the 8 weeks. That person's talking to them about macronutrient choices, how much protein they're getting, what do their meals look like? If they
Right.
don't like particular food, what can we substitute that's a healthier option? They're looking at their meal plan. Like in our manual, these people are writing down what they're eating so that the nutritionist can look at this and say, okay, good choice here. We need to clean this up. What can we do different? So I think the key is that we, not only need to edge people, we need to give them like surefire strategies that are going to work and hold their hand long enough for them to develop habits. Because by the way, once these people get done 8 weeks to wellness, Robert, and they've lost 30 pounds and they have a spring in their step and they're not as inflamed and their mood is better and they're actually happy for the first time in years when they wake up in the morning. They recognize that those habits created that change in their overall health and they want to stay consistent with them, but we have to give them strategies to implement those habits in the beginning because they're very different than what they're currently doing.
So if I were to ask you to wrap it up in a nice tight bow with the wellness score, one of my buddies watches my podcast all the time. And, he's now taking care of himself, his health. He's on the 8 weeks to wellness raw plan, if you will.
Mhm.
So, what would be the next step since he's kind of like mastered all these things? Something that those patients who are exercising effectively, watching their diet, but want a little bit more performance, longevity, and a little bit more health span when we're talking about a guy in our age bracket.
It's a great question, Robert. I think for me, and this has really moved the needle for my overall health, I think it's really focusing on the mental aspect of our health and really understanding how our thoughts and our emotions influence us hormonally. For me, and this is a part of 8 weeks to wellness now, but every morning I get up at 4:30 or 5 a.m. I've just always been a natural early riser.
Mhm.
But I take time to meditate each morning. I have a hot tub. I go in there. I do deep breathing exercises. I do meditation. I read. I love to read. So, reading for me is my time to kind of just be with myself and be with my thoughts. So I think, that one thing that, people, we always say nutrition, we always say exercise, but I think that mental emotional piece, and, when I ask, it's very interesting, Robert, we ask this question, we ask 5 areas of a person's health, and then we ask them about their energy level, but we ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, and this is literally how I talk to a patient. So Robert, on a scale of 1 to 10, with one being, I suck, I'm horrible, I'm really no good in this area of my health, 10 being, Dr. Dane, I'm so buttoned up in this area of my health, I probably could teach you a thing or two. So now they know the scale, right? Don't bullshit me. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, Robert, but that
We're
they understand
good.
on that scale. And then I'll say, so give me where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 with your exercise? And he'll say, well, I'm a 4. Okay, well, How about your nutrition and overall what you eat and supplement? Oh, I'm horrible there. I'm a two, right?
Mm.
How about your sleep quality and quantity? How much you get and how good it is? Where are you though on your scale of 1 to 10? Oh, I'm okay with my sleep. I'm a six. Okay. And then we ask them about stress, right? So on a
Mm.
scale of 1 to 10, with one being I have very high amounts of stress and I'm not very good at managing stress. And more importantly, I don't know how to manage it. I don't have stress management tools. And 10 being, Dr. Dane, I have very little stress, but more importantly, I have stress management tools that I know help my body cope with the stress. Where do you think you are on a scale of 1 to 10? I hardly ever get anybody to tell me a 9 or 10, but you know how many times they ever, oh, I'm a one or two, right? So it's that we all have stress in our life, but you know what we haven't been taught, Robert, is stress management tools. I don't know if you learned this growing up. I certainly didn't learn how to
No.
manage my emotions, what my thoughts meant, what, how to time manage, like the things that financials that create this ungodly amount of stress for people. And look at, when we have young kids that are committing suicide, and we have suicide at all-time high rates, that tells us we are not doing a good job helping people manage their thought life and their emotional life.
So you would say the mental aspect, grasping that. And by the way, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know how to spell the word filter till I got married. So, which has been a bit of an epiphany for the last 20 plus years. But moving right along, my question to you is, you call it 8 weeks to wellness. Why 8 weeks?
So when we started developing the program, Robert, I do a lot of reading on habits. Like I love books like Atomic Habits by James Clear. I love the book by Charles Duhigg, The Power of Habit. And from all the research back then, it was anywhere between like 56 and 68 days to form a habit, right? So, 8 weeks to wellness being 56 days, I'm like, what I wanted is I wanted to be able to look a patient in the eye and say, Robert, I want you to trust me that you're going to do this for 8 weeks. Okay. Now you've done it your way
Hmm?
for a long time, not weeks, but years, decades. And look where it's gotten you. Can you trust the process and do this for 8 weeks? And I promise you, we're going to do your wellness score at the beginning and we're going to do your wellness score at the end. You don't have to do this for the rest of your life. Let's just focus on the next 8 weeks. Then you'll get to decide if the time and energy and money that you put into this program was worth it. So I didn't want it to be a lifetime because I think sometimes people come into it like, oh, this is a huge commitment, of my time, of my, my energy. I just wanted it to be a long enough period of time where people could see. And again, Robert, when we have chronic disease that people have had for years and decades, that is going to take some time to reverse that, right? So we can't, it's not 2 weeks to wellness, right? So it's 8 weeks to wellness because I felt that was long enough period of time to see significant physiological changes, but a short enough period of time where people could say, I could invest 8 weeks.
Can we call it 8 weeks to longevity? Because knowing the program, you're really checking a lot of the longevity boxes as well.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing, Robert, is people always ask me, what happens after 8 weeks? I'm like, well, this is a pretty logical question. If what you were doing for 8 weeks worked so well, why would you ever want to discontinue? And most people in the program, Robert, by week 6 or 7, they are nervously asking me, what happens after 8 weeks?
Mm.
Right. And I always look at them and say, well, we kick you out of the office. And then I laugh. And I'm like, no, we're going to sit down. We're going to redo your wellness score. We're
Right.
going to see your improvements. And then we'll talk about where we go from here, right? But we want you to continue the same habits.
Why wouldn't they want to stay on the health road for perpetuity? I
They
don't
do.
understand that.
They
So
do.
as we
They just
wind,
need the scaffolding and the support.
so with the American population being overweight and obese, not willing to change, resilient to change, resistance to change, what would be the one thing that if you had that person in front of you that you would tell them they need to change tomorrow? What is the number one bang for the buck change that they can have?
Obviously, I would say it's getting rid of ultra processed foods. I mean, stick to one ingredient. This is what we tell our patients, one ingredient, organic foods. If you can pronounce it, you can eat it. If you can pick it or pluck it or plant it, you can eat
Great.
it. So
That's
I
great.
would say for me, I think biggest bang for your buck, as you said, is getting rid of the ultra processed food. Nothing out of bags, nothing out of cans, nothing out of boxes. Start making your meals. We've lost the art of being
Mm.
able to make meals. My wife and I really enjoy Sundays because it's our meal prep day.
for the
We
week.
meal prep for the whole week. We'll make
Mhm.
4 or 5 dishes and put them in glass Rubbermaid containers. We have meals for the week, and we have a great time. We cook, we laugh, we watch football, so it's like I think one of the biggest things is learn to get back in the kitchen and start learning to cook with one ingredient whole foods. We belong to a CSA, Robert. Every single week I get a big box of vegetables that are dropped off to my door. I don't have to go pick them up. It's from a local farm. They deliver them. We always open the box like, wow, what's in here? Now we got to prepare all this stuff. So I think, getting back to getting in the kitchen, enjoying cooking, that's what our grandmothers did. And we ate healthy and we were healthy.
Without question, indeed. So, if we would have this podcast 3 years from now, 3 years in the future, what do you foretell we will be talking about?
I think the sick people are going to get sicker, and I think the healthy people are going to get healthier. And I think what we're going to be talking about is the chasm between the really healthy people and the really sick people. And
Mm.
we all know that the really healthy people are paying for the really sick people through insurance. It's interesting, Robert, but I always say this, I'm a pretty good driver. I haven't had a lot of accidents, a lot of tickets, and I get a pretty good rate on my auto insurance. But I'm also a very good consumer of health, right? I don't get sick a lot. I only go to the doctor if I have trauma. I haven't had a lot of surgeries. At almost 57 years, I haven't been a burden to my health insurance company or to the government. But do I get any money back for that? Do I get a break on my insurance? Does my health insurance call me and say, listen, your rate is going to be 70% lower because you utilize 70% less of the resources of our system. No, I don't get a break for that, right? And somehow we have to narrow that chasm, that gap between the really healthy and the really sick. And you know what the difference is? It's education. It's having the right doctor to support these people. I always say, Robert, we're at a point in society, and maybe this is what I hope we'll be talking about 3 years from now,
Mhm.
where people say, I have two doctors. I have a sick care doctor that I go to when I get sick, but I also have a functional medicine doctor, a wellness doctor, and the two aren't the same doctor. And I find the more I see my functional wellness doctor, the less I have the need for my sick care doctor that prescribes me medications.
And I think the chiropractic profession is the functional doctor of the future. I think it's our next frontier, if you will.
There's no doubt about it. And it's
Uh,
fun. I know, Robert, you've been in practice a long time. People ask me sometimes, what's your retirement strategy? And I'm like, I don't have one.
Not
I love
retiring,
you and I both love to travel. We
not
have great
retiring.
clients that we travel with, right? We have a lot of fun. We get to use our success to go out and enjoy our life. But when it comes to waking up every day, I think happiness is about having a level of attitude of service towards humanity is to wake up and say, I get to work, make the world a better place because God gave me this talent of being a chiropractor and I get to go out and speak the truth and adjust people and, tweak their lifestyle and I get to make healthier individuals. And that makes me feel good. So like, why do I want to give that up?
Indeed. Everybody, Dr. Dane Donohue, 8 Weeks to Wellness, Rob Silverman, Proven Health Alternatives.